أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين أبو القاسم محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back once more to Faith Forum. Unfortunately, Dr. Warsi is still visiting the shrines in Iraq, and I'm sitting in for him one more time. In British universities and schools, indeed schools around the world, education treats religion as one of the social sciences or an element within social sciences. And young Muslims studying in those institutions have to adjust their religious view of religion into a social view and still retain their faith in Islam, in the Prophet, peace be upon him, and in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This process has come increasingly under discussion from Muslim academics and religious figures. What are we putting into it? And what are we doing to support young people undergoing this educational process? These are questions that we have to answer as educationalists and as academics and as religious communities. However, we need to be informed of what is really happening in the education system. And so tonight I'm welcoming a young guest who has finished her university education and is now active as a teacher in a school. And I'm very pleased to welcome our sister Sabah Batoum. Assalamu alaikum, sister.
Alaikum assalam.
Thank you very much for being here tonight, and welcome to Faith Forum and the Faith Forum family.
Thank you.
Around the world. When you were starting at university, because you studied, I believe, theology.
Yeah.
What did you expect it to be like? A lot of educationalists have noted that students tend to come to us thinking they know what the subject is, and then they can be quite upset or disturbed to find that things are quite different to what they expect.
Yeah, they were really different. Well, firstly, I studied theology and Islamic studies. I did joint honours at Birmingham University. I went in, especially with the Islamic studies, I went in kind of thinking that I'm going to be looking at, Islamic history, a lot of Islamic history and the various practices within Islam. And theology, I thought it's all about the study of God, and that's it. I wasn't really expecting anything else. But when going and throughout the 3 years, there was a variety of courses, like modules that you had to look at. So we had to look at, like, for example, with theology, it was about, how Jesus in art, and we had to look at biblical studies and like feminism within the Bible. And then on the other hand, with Islamic studies, there was a bit of Islamic history, but not according to, as we're going to talk about later, like Shia Islam. It was very much what the majority of Muslims believe about early Islam, and it was looking at women in Islam, but famous women that the majority of Sunnis view as famous. So yeah, that's it really. Yeah, those were my expectations, but they were very different to what we actually came across at university.
Yes. And knowing you quite well, I'm sure that you raised your concerns with members of staff I know I did on courses I've done, and there's a tremendous pressure to conform to what we would call a mediated view, that the academy has taken a position that this is what Islam is, and when Muslims say no, that's not what it is, they say, oh yes it is, and there's a pantomime-like exchange of Muslims saying that's not what we do, and academics saying, oh yes it is.
Yeah, I think that was really true at the university, but the problem that I faced there was that a lot of the academics, they were Muslims themselves. So, you know, when I raised a particular concern about, you know, for example, Abu Bakr being seen as the savior of Islam, which it is correct for some Muslims that there is that view that obviously they see him as a savior of Islam, but when there's other Muslims who don't agree with that view, if I raised that concern, it was seen as like, you know, well, we're academics, we know what we're talking about, you know, you're just a student. So I think that was the problem there. It's like, because they're academics and because they're Muslims themselves, you know, they think that, you know, obviously that's the main view and that's what all Muslims believe.
Yes, it's quite understandable really that we all tend to think what we believe is the obvious truth for everybody else.
Yeah.
I suppose with time we get used to it and hopefully we correct ourselves. But for students who are keen to get knowledge and dig truth out, it can be quite frustrating, can't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating when you're not able to voice your opinions or like even your beliefs. I mean, the positive aspect about, you know, looking at theology was, for example, in some modules when we were looking at Christian ethics, we were able to discuss, you know, whether, for example, euthanasia or whether abortion is right or wrong without any fear of, you know, anyone saying that, you know, you're not a true believer or anything like that. But when it came to issues about Islam, you know, for example, the split between Sunni and Shias, it was, and, you know, looking at, for example, women in Islam, and it was funny how Bibi Fatima alayhi salam, she wasn't mentioned within that module. It was the majority of it was about the Prophet's wife, Hazrat Aisha, but there was nothing about Bibi Fatima alayhi salam. And when I voiced that concern, there's a lot of kind of like angry looks given, and it's like you can't share those opinions without, you know, anyone kind of like saying, oh, you must be a Shia, and it's seen as quite negative.
So we're seeing the problem not so much with the university,
yeah,
but what informs the university, and that's a body of conservative Sunni opinion.
Yeah.
That's, I think, to be fair, they're not actually trying to impose a view, they're trying to avoid what they perceive as a potential conflict or trouble in the student.
But the trouble is that they're just teaching that one view. They're not looking at, I mean, Islamic studies should be about, you know, the whole of Islam. So obviously the Islamic studies should cover that there are different groups within Islam. And I know in one of the years there was a whole module on Sufism and the beliefs and practices within Sufism. A whole module was dedicated to that. So what puzzled me was why aren't there any modules to do with, you know, you can't ignore Shia Islam. There's a huge population of Muslims are Shias. You can't ignore that. And
a very vocal population at times.
So you can't ignore that. That is part of Islamic studies. So it's a bit strange why that's not, you know, taught at the university.
Yeah. I mean, in many ways, it's a lesson for us as well to look at what we teach in our houses and our colleges as well.
Yeah.
It's very easy just to slip into that comfort zone of we know what we're talking about, rather than having a genuine inquiry, because we can see that Sunni thought, its focus changes over time, as does Shia thought, by different speakers, different concerns. And so that to have a static concept of what Shia studies should be is really teaching about an Islam that has ceased to exist, when we're saying that we're discussing living religions in the study of religions and theology. So it's not just an attack on Sunni scholars. It's a question mark for all scholarship on what we're actually teaching our students. Do we give them the tools early on enough in their studies and the opportunity to access other information, to actually use the skills they're supposed to have and to have them? Now, in this environment, the university environment, of course we have ISOCs, Islamic societies, and ABSOCs, Ahlul Bayt societies. Did you find any cooperation between these groups? And if there was or there wasn't, how could things be improved, did you feel?
There definitely wasn't. The time that I was at university, there wasn't even an Ahlul Bayt society there, or if there was, I didn't hear about it. But
we can be very secretive here.
But there's no, I mean, if there was, I didn't see there was no cooperation whatsoever. I mean, even for example, like going to the prayer room and praying, and obviously praying the Shia way, it raised so many eyebrows. But there were notices obviously on the board about, you know, respecting different methods of prayer. But there was no, you know, there was talks about, you know, for example, if there's a talk about the Prophet's life and Abu Bakr and Umar, but there didn't seem to be any kind of cooperation or anything to do with Shia Islam. It's just like if anybody kind of saw you praying the Shia way, it was seen as like a huge kind of controversy.
Yes, I've recently been involved with an event at that university, and the ABSOC and the ISOC did work together on Islam Awareness Week, and it seemed to be quite fruitful, because these positions are never static, are they? It depends who's there at that particular time.
Yeah.
I had a Maliki friend from the Gambia, and he told me that he'd left the university and he'd gone to live in a particular area. And I said to him, "Do you pray with your hands down?" And he went, "Yes." "And why?" And I said, "Oh, be careful." And, you know, and he thought it was strange. And then he came back a few weeks later. I was working in a shop, and he stood there, and he suddenly burst into tears. And he said, "I couldn't believe it. Somebody came up and whispered in my ear, 'You dirty Shia,' expletive, during the Jummah prayer." And then he said, "As I went into Ruku, somebody kicked me from behind, and when I went down into the Sajda, somebody trod on my head." And he said, "I couldn't believe it." He said, "In my country, we don't ask what sort of Muslim you are." And we didn't at the university. And now, I find my fellow Muslims are stamping on me, and I'm not sure what for. It was very tragic that such a pious brother, he not only recited Yasin every morning before he left the house, he recited everything you can imagine. He didn't sleep after the sub prayers. He just carried on and then went to work. And this is how he was treated by people who didn't even know or bother to ask what he believed, but judged him because of where he put his hands in the prayer.
I mean, to be fair to the Islamic Society, I do remember in my second year when I went back to university after the holidays, whoever the new Islamic Society leader was for the sisters side, there was a little box there, and in that box there was mores which somebody had obviously put there. And throughout the second and third year that I stayed at that university, that box always remained and no one moved it. So I thought obviously this new leader, whoever it was of the Islamic Society, somebody must have put that box there. So I do give them that credit.
That's good. I think sometimes as well we can be very sensitive about issues and make a small thing worse. I'm not saying we should remain quiet about everything, but we have to approach every problem in life with a sense of sabr and reason, and not just rush in and say, why have you done this to me? I think 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, people haven't realised. We all go around offending each other through carelessness rather than willful intent.
It depends to what extent though, doesn't it? Because I mean, for example, like if we go back to the first issue about, you know, what they teach or at university, I mean, to remain silent when someone's like telling you that all Muslims believe that, you know, Abu Bakr is the saviour of Islam, that I couldn't help myself. I can't remain silent to that issue, because it's like all Muslims don't believe that. So yeah, what you're saying is right. Obviously, you know, certain things you don't have to fight every single battle, but certain things you can't just sit there and.
Yes. Well, I was at an Interfaith meeting in London once, and the person chairing the whole event declared from the stage that everyone present believed that the baby Jesus was the Son of God. And I think mine was the only voice there that said, no, we don't. But we can be too quiet about things.
Yeah.
And it leads other people into a false sense of security in what they think they know. And it is our duty to inform them when they misrepresent us or someone else's views. Now, you mentioned women in Islam. And of course there was a time in Europe and the West when women couldn't attend universities. And I think that it's still hard for women to build academic careers. Harder than it is for men, certainly. Assuming they've got any intellect left. Yes. after undergraduate studies. Did you find being a Muslim woman in hijab an issue at university?
No, not really. I mean, at Birmingham University, I guess you kind of like stand out. But now, I mean, especially my third year, I noticed that first and second year students, there was a lot of Muslims, especially kind of we were in the humanities side of things like so history and people looking at geography. I mean, you could see that there were a lot of Muslim students there. I didn't face any problem whatsoever. I mean, in fact, it made it, especially when looking at theology and looking at like Christian ethics, on that side of the course, there was probably about 3 Muslims in that course, but it got more kind of interactive because they were very interested to know like our views on things like abortion and things like euthanasia. So I thought it was quite good, you know.
It does sound good. It's because it's from universities and colleges that the society changes in many ways, and that if sisters in hijab are comfortable at university, then it means that schools and colleges they go to and workplaces are going to become comfortable with sisters in hijab in a like fashion. But then, of course, our studies come to an end, don't they?
Yeah.
And as with anyone completing their education, we're thrust into a very different world, the world of working, earning a living, and building a career. For many graduates, the choice is teaching, particularly graduates from humanities departments. And here, the experiences of university life and the things that have been learned at the mosque and the madrasa come together to teach the younger generations of pupils who are not necessarily Muslims, pupils of all faiths. And the young teacher has not only to establish their career, but also to represent Islam. I'm an old man and I represent Islam, but I do it as I please. A teacher in front of a class has little choice. People are looking at them, just as a television appearance, people are looking at us. For a young person and an inexperienced teacher, this must be quite a challenge. Sister Saba, you started work at school after teacher training. What did you carry through from your education? And what challenges did you feel were placed upon you?
I think the biggest thing that I made sure that I carried through was to, whatever I was teaching was to make sure that I kind of thoroughly researched it and find out whether that was the majority view or what other views there were, because being back at university and being told that this is what all Muslims believe, I felt really kind of uncomfortable. So I didn't want to obviously put another person in that position. So I made sure that anything that I taught, I understood whether it was a belief held by all members of that faith, or whether it's what are the other views. Basically, that was the main thing. In terms of challenges, the biggest challenge that's especially teaching religious studies is that you're teaching, again, what the lecturers have to do. You're teaching something, for example, in Islam, you're teaching that this is what all Muslims believe. You only give one view, regardless of whatever school you're teaching. This is something that, the exam boards say that, all Muslims believe this. That's if you're teaching Islam, all Muslims believe this. But whereas when you come to teach other things, like if you teach Christianity, let's say if you're looking at issues such as divorce, you'd say, okay, well, Roman Catholics believe this about divorce, you've got Protestants believe this about the divorce, and then you've got some liberal Christians who believe this. So you get a huge, a wide kind of like, what's the word? View. Yeah, you get a wide view of, what different groups within that faith believe. But when it comes to Islam, you're just students are just taught that this is what Muslims believe. Like, for example, if you're looking at the 5 pillars, you teach that this is what Muslims believe about 5 pillars, but there's no kind of concept. While some Muslims have other kind of pillars, like Tawheed, Adl, Nabuwat. But that's the main challenge. But the thing is, to pass the GCSE, that's what you have to teach, And for example, when you teach about Shiism, it's what the Sunnis believe about Shia. So for example, teaching that Ashura is a celebration of the death of Hussein, and it's not a celebration, it's a commemoration. And I find that really annoying, but I still have to teach the students that, because that's what they have to know in order to pass the GCSE.
Yes. I must admit I have some sympathy with the view of a celebration, because we're such a serious people. Then we celebrate wiladats with a majlis and some food, and usually there are people who want to perform some matam. And then when it's a wafat, we have a majlis and we have some food and people perform some matam. So it's confusing. The only difference, of course, is at one we express sympathy, and at the other we wish people Kushali Mubarak. Because I believe it's our gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for birth and for death. We don't reject anything that he sends us.
Yeah, but when you're teaching students something's a celebration, they're not going to think, as intellectually as you are. They think celebration, okay, maybe they cut a cake, they dance, whatever it is, but that's not.
Yes, that's when you pull their ears and make them cry. This is all taking place as well in the background of an incredibly heavy workload for a newly qualified teacher. Rest is not an option, is it?
No, it certainly isn't, especially with family and those responsibilities. I think teaching, it's teaching in general, whatever you're teaching. I think especially in the Muslim community, it's not given as much credit as other jobs are. For example, there's a lot of emphasis, on dentistry, medicine, lawyers, things like that. But teaching is difficult. It is, just because it's not like a 5-year course, like, being a doctor is. It's still it's a 1-year training course, but there's so much crammed into it. And then afterwards as well, like, you work. Let's say, like, I go to work from 8 till about 5, and then you come home, you bring work home as well, like planning, marking, whatever it is. It's really, really tough. So, on behalf of all the teachers, I'm just saying that, we deserve a little bit more credit.
Yes, because in the first year or even 2 of teaching, you're under constant supervision and assessment, aren't you, to progress or remain in the career even? Yeah,
because you have like a 1-year newly qualified year where it's a 1-year induction year, so you have to, there's a lot of paperwork to do and constant observations to see whether you're good enough.
So there you are, working normal working hours, working when you get home, and you're representing Islam. What resources do you find from the Islamic community? Are there any support packages?
None whatsoever, no. Are there? No, there's not. I haven't come across anything. There's no one that, you could turn to for some kind of resource pack. Is it? Yeah. Nothing. Is there one? Have you found one?
Well, there's me. But no, I feel there's a need for greater investment.
Yeah, definitely.
I feel there's a need for investment, not just in our students, but in our students particularly, who are going to become teachers, and those of our community who are active in teaching. We can find immense amounts of money to build schools that are used 1 or 2 days a week, or imam bargas that are used 1 or 2 nights a week, except in, of course, Muharram and the month of Ramadan. And yet, we can't focus any resources on people who are representing our faith and teaching our children. This seems to me to be something that we should all be saying, we should be doing something on this. We pay khums, zakat, and give sadaqah to improve our community and to meet our religious obligations, and providing support for education is one of those religious duties that we should take more seriously and be more generous with, I think.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, actually, I just thought of, because, there's so much emphasis on, medicine and things like that in our communities, but people seem to forget that, how did those students of medicine actually get there? They actually had teachers who, taught them whatever they needed to know.
Yes.
Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yes, and it has to be said, if a doctor gets it wrong, just one patient may die. But a teacher can corrupt a whole school full of children.
True.
So
True.
We should really take preventative measures and help our teachers. Now, you teach religious studies now in a school. How do you approach presenting a faith that perhaps you strongly disagree with, and you have to teach this? to children who may strongly disagree with it for completely different reasons to your own?
I mean, me personally, I don't find it tough because, I mean, I'm quite open-minded. I like researching about other religions and finding out why they believe that. I mean, you don't have to, like, the problem with religious studies is, I mean, even when I told people I'm a religious studies teacher, they automatically assume that I'm kind of dictating Islam. I'm an Islamic studies teacher. I teach everyone about Islam and why it's right and things like that. But that's not what it's about. I think religious studies, it's so important because it's teaching, you know, our children about tolerance. I mean, you can't ignore the fact that, you know, you got wars and things like that, and religion plays a big factor in the world today. So religious studies is important because it's teaching children about tolerance and, you know, about integrating with each other. So whether you agree with a faith or not, that's not what religious studies is about. It's about learning about their faith. So when you go out, you know, you're not hurling abuse at, you know, a Christian or a Jew. You're actually, you know, taking a step back and understanding, okay, well, this is what they believe and this is why they believe it.
So religious studies for you is a way of dispelling ignorance.
Definitely, yeah.
Thereby removing the fear that feeds intolerance and hatred.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with, like, students, you know, if they, let's say the Muslim students and they're, you know, learning about Judaism and, you know, they're interested in it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's spreading knowledge, and, you know, it's good to find out what other religions believe and why they believe it. And I mean, for example, if someone's looking at Judaism, Christianity and Islam, there's a lot of obviously similarities there as well. And I don't, and people are probably going to disagree, but I don't see there's anything wrong with, you know, students learning about the faiths and kind of questioning them.
Yeah. Yes, particularly as in our faith, Islam, we have many references to faith being from free will, that it's man's choice, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends the Quran as guidance, but it's also misguidance for the misguided. And we're repeatedly told to look around, to study other religions, the ancient peoples, to look at other faiths, often to see faults, but also to take the good from them as well. In thinking of you as a Muslim, what do you try, if you try, to take from Islam to share with your students?
If I take anything. I think the main thing, being a Shia Muslim, what I try to get students to think about, so even though I have to, for example, if they're looking at Islam, I have to teach them, you know, what Muslims believe. But for example, if I'm teaching, I mean, I had to teach some students about how Abu Talib was not a Muslim when he died. I made sure that I made clear that, okay, yeah, this is one Muslim view, but this is not the only Muslim view. There are Muslims, a lot of Muslims, who believe that Abu Talib was a Muslim. So I just want to make that clear. So I kind of, it's probably naughty of me, but I drop in little comments here and there just so they understand that, you know, this is not the only view, that there are other views.
No, I don't think it's naughty at all. In a book published by the Open University and by someone who is a major figure in the philosophy of religion and the history of religion, he comments that the Arabic word mosque means to prostrate, and this occurs word at all. And they've confused mosque with masjid.
Masjid, yeah.
And there's then a doubt about everything we're being told in some of the academic textbooks.
Definitely, yeah.
And my own feeling was, if they can't explain my religion to a reasonable satisfaction, what are they teaching about Sikhism,
Yeah.
Hinduism, Jainism, Judaism? Many faiths that are seen as being oriental in origin and exotic, or they're described as native religions, which are still or strange, but not really exotic because they're a bit primitive. This doubt, how did you cope with it?
I was just going to add one point before I answer that question. I just remembered, what you're saying is absolutely right, because one example, just to kind of make it a bit more clear, like when I'm teaching about, for example, Roman Catholics and how Roman Catholics believe, the example that Roman Catholics believe that all religions are true, they all have some truth in it, but it's only Christianity which is going to get you into heaven. But from my understanding, I'm sure that Roman Catholics believe that all religions are false. The only way you're going to get into heaven is through Jesus and through believing in, the crucifixion, resurrection. Is the Roman Catholic view about all religions being true?
At one time, what you're saying was the papal position and a common position amongst Catholics. But since 1962, I think it is, Vatican II, and the papal bull Nostra Aetate, that view was modified, that they accepted the right of others to find other pathways to God. And so they basically suspend judgment on it. And I think I take a similar position. I believe that Shia Islam and the love of Ahlul Bayt is the best way to get to paradise if I perform it properly. It's not guaranteed just by naming myself Shia. And that the Quran clearly says that other faiths do achieve paradise. But my view is you don't travel to London if you want to get to Bradford when there's a direct train. So I get on what seems to me to be the fastest, easiest route to the destination that my heart desires. And I'm sure that committed Roman Catholics feel pretty much the same.
See, that kind of like has answered that question. So, every kind of like issue that you teach, it's with an RS teacher, well, with me personally, I feel like I have to constantly kind of refer to, let's say if I'm talking about Sikhism, I have to like refer to, like a Sikh source just to make sure that what I'm saying is right, because I don't trust the textbooks. But this is like where something needs to be done, someone needs to do something. I know like personally, I know people have obviously written to exam boards and, like said that but it's not just one exam board, it's like different exam boards. Each exam board seems to be making its own mistakes. So this is where like I feel the communities need to get together and do something about this, because it's like the thing is I still have to teach wrong things in order to get students to pass the GCSE, but it's kind of like a moral issue which needs to be dealt with.
Yes, it's the horns of a dilemma, isn't it? So what we're expanding our area of correction, that our viewers watching this have the power to do something about. I've attended lots of seminars and workshops run by and arranged by other faiths, sitting with their scholars, explaining in detail small issues. And yet, most of the interfaith activity, and this is, I believe, based mainly on an ecumenical view of religion originating in Christian thought, most of this is content if we just meet each other, smile and drink a cup of tea and say, well, we're all creatures of God. When what we really need is to actually discuss some of our differences in a sensible and an academic way. It's not about arguing and shouting who's right, who's wrong. It's about finding out what people really believe and what they're really doing, and then seeing if we've got a conflict.
Definitely, yeah.
what would you like to see come from the interfaith community, the community of all faiths working together? What would you like to see them provide that teachers like yourself could draw resources from?
I think some kind of, let's say for example, if it's Hindus, the kind of Hindu leaders could get together and have some kind of like, textbook or something that this is what we believe, and that could be, shared with the exam boards. It's like the interfaith, community needs to work with the exam board to come up with one source, okay? Because there's no point, the exam board saying, well, this is what, Hindus believe, and then Hindus saying, well, no, this is what we believe. There needs to be some kind of dialogue going on there that can be then passed to teachers. So,
yeah. Of course, the problem with Hinduism, you've got Vedic Hindus and you've got Brahmanic Hindus and
but the
neo-post-Brahmanic.
That's with every religion. Then where do we stop then? Even teaching about Islam, like with religious studies, you have to, with edXL, you have to teach, for example, like Barelvi Sunnis, what they believe, and Deobandi Sunnis. It's like, where do you draw the line then? Because there's so many groups.
I think it's interesting you say that's true of all religions, because the way we actually treat Hinduism as a religion is actually quite untrue, isn't it? That Hinduism is comprised of many faith systems and religions that we would define. And really the idea that Christianity is the European religion is a false perception. Christianity may be the dominant religion in Europe, but European religions are very different. We've got paganism, we've got Wiccan, we've got various branches of Celtic Christianity, we've got Unitarianism originates in Europe, where they don't believe in Trinity. And so we've also got devil worship, of course, but that's not quite so popular these days. And so we've imposed a false concept of religion, either on Christianity or on Hinduism. They're not the same in that sort of categorical sense. And so what we really need to do is even go back even further, isn't it? And work out what we're really saying when we call something a religion.
Yeah. This is where the communities need to work with the exam boards, because the exam boards have made it so kind of like simple that, this is Islam, this is Christianity, this is Judaism, but in fact it's not that simple as you've just said. And that's where there needs to be some kind of communication there.
Because we can have great fun with some of the divisions in Judaism, can't we?
Exactly, yeah.
If we're not shouted down. So, what does the future hold? Do you have signs of hope?
I think I do, yeah. I mean, well, my kind of goal is to become head of religious studies. So,
For Europe?
Well, I can't. That's not going to happen. I mean, one day I'd like to get into like the Sacre, where the kind of like, how do you explain it? Groups of religious studies teachers and advisories and all of them. I'd like to get into that committee because they're in control of what's taught in Birmingham, in whatever school you are in Birmingham, in religious studies. This kind of group decides what's going to be taught in religious studies. So if I get myself onto that board, or if somebody like from the community, because I know like from the HOSA or whatever, if somebody, even yourself, if you get yourself onto that kind of committee, you can, people can make clear that actually there's lots of views. But
I actually know many members of the local Sacre. Awfully nice fellows, but not the sort of people you want to drink tea with. I'm joking. They're very good. They're very honest people.
Yeah.
But they themselves are the product of these misinformation systems that we've allowed to develop in our educational structures.
Yeah, because the problem with that is, like within that group, the local Sacre, they don't have representations from different groups. like I know that there's a Muslim on that local sacre, but there's not a representation of someone from, let's say, Sufi Islam or someone from Shiaism. That there's just one Muslim there who represents what all Muslims believe.
Yeah. And so what we should really be doing is setting up committees to establish a broader consensus of what could be taught to be fed into a joint representative on the sacre.
Yeah, and I think my other goal, what was that? Yeah, to become head of religious studies. I think if I become head of religious studies, then I can kind of take control of what I teach in my school. But that's only my school, though. What about the other schools where, all sorts is taught about Shiaism and misrepresentations? Don't
be embarrassed about wanting to be in control. We're used to megalomaniac teachers. We've all suffered at their hands. So there's hope for the future, and there are things that we can do. So if you could change one thing, just one thing, and you have absolute power now. I can give this easily because we're in television world. What would you like to change in the education system or practice?
Okay. Can I say two?
Only if you count them as 1A and 1B.
Well, 1A, which kind of will link on to 1B, is kind of moving aside a little bit from religious studies. It's to get more Muslims, especially from the Shia community, get teaching religious studies, because it doesn't have the same status as, for example, teaching maths or English. That is something within the community as a whole. Religious studies is not seen as significant, but I think it's really important. That's why the first change would be to get Shia Muslims to get them involved in get more graduating, studying theology, getting them doing religious studies, PGC, because I think that's the first step if we're going to because at the end of the day it's about the representation of Shiaism and a representation of Islam as a whole. So we need Muslims teaching religious studies, and it's not about dictating, it's just about getting involved with the subject so that people, younger students and other non-Muslims are aware that Islam's not just one particular view. There are many views within the religion. That's the first thing.
It was a big A.
Well, that's it really.
Capital A.
No, I think if we get that first 1A, then everything else would kind of automatically happen, because you'd get Muslims involved into what we were talking about before, the local kind of sacre committees. You'd get them more engaged with the subject, and people would want to do something. But because there's not enough, Shia Muslims teaching religious studies, I can't think of I haven't come across another one from our Shia community who is a religious studies teacher.
Yeah. And very quickly, point B, very brief.
That's it, it's just linked onto that. So everything, I summed it up together. You said one, so
I see. I was waiting for point A, of course, because I'm a pedantic type of fellow. Brothers and sisters watching the programme, we've seen that there's much we can do to help in the education of our children and young people and representing our beliefs within the wider context of all faiths. We are not imprisoned except by our own lack of action. And we need to assess the best way to use our resources to provide for our futures and for the health and welfare of our children and the education system which they have to survive. Imam Ali alayhi salam said, "Teach your children for the world they will live in." It was a valid question when he said it, and I think tonight we've demonstrated that it is still a valid and important question that we must answer. Thank you for watching Faith Forum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.